it's really a good thing that we're not all identical, right? So thank goodness that we have this biodiversity and genetic diversity, but that we're just looking at the world differently. Once you become aware of your thoughts and you realize the thoughts are not necessarily you, those are just thoughts that you are having, and you have perspective, you actually have agency over that. You can change your thoughts.
What would you say that biggest contributor is to someone's ability to adapt?
The key takeaway is just being...
Welcome to The Edge of Possible, the podcast dedicated to helping you achieve extraordinary things. I'm your host, Cameron Atlas, and together, let's unlock your edge. In a world that's changing faster than ever, adaptability is perhaps the single most important skill that we can develop. But so many of us get stuck in a rigid way of thinking. And I know I'm definitely been guilty of this in the past. And that's why I'm so excited to have my really good friend, Eric Colbert, on the show today to discuss this. Eric is a successful entrepreneur and a former touring musician. He went from performing on the Vans Warped Tour to building multiple successful companies, including spending the past 10 years as partner and COO at the software agency Spark 6. Eric also has a master's degree in evolutionary psychology. So we talk deeply about what it really takes to adapt to change. And you're going to hear his own remarkable story about hitting the reset button on his entire life in his late 30s. We're not only going to unpack the mindset we all need to navigate the massive change that's happening in the world right now, but you're also going to walk away with an absolutely brilliant way for resolving conflict in a relationship. That's coming right up here on The Edge of Possible. Eric, good to see you, my man.
Good to see you, Cam. How you been?
Been really well. Really looking forward to the conversation today. You built some really successful companies, performed on the Vans Warped Tour, which we're definitely going to be covering a bit today. But you've also got a background in evolutionary psychology, right? So I really want to start with what you see as the biggest contributor to somebody's ability to adapt. Because with things like AI and other technology completely disrupting our lives and basically every single industry out there, this is maybe the most important skill that we can be developing or needed to be developing in order to stay ahead. So, what would you say that biggest contributor is to someone's ability to adapt?
Yeah, I mean, you threw back some old school stuff from music to my background in evolutionary psychology, and your question here, I think, is poignant for sure. And knowing that as a species, we have been so adaptable in our time here on this planet, and the key takeaway is just being flexible. I mean, that's almost baked into the word adaptability, but like on a more holistic level of not being rigid in your thinking and not being rigid in how things have been, and like they trying to get those to continue, whether those conditions allow for it or not. So I think we need to really embrace kind of the openness and the flexibility of our capabilities as humans with each other and leaning on one another to get through this. I mean, this is arguably one of the most unprecedented times in our human history, although maybe fire was more significant or, some other, great evolutions. But yeah, this is one that's definitely shaking people to their core, especially those that are in it and around it a lot, as to just what is going to happen. And, most of us like to have predictability and some consistency. And I'm not sure that's going to be in the cards for a lot of us. It's going to be a lot of unknowns and just really embracing being uncomfortable for a little bit and just being flexible, I think, to what comes at us.
Yeah, I think flexibility is a big one, right? And the other word that you mentioned in there is around, not being rigid. Admittedly, a relationship of mine that ended back in 2014, she mentioned like that exact word of like being too rigid in how I live my life. And she was 100% accurate. Like when I look back on that, because there were just some massive changes that I knew I had to make. While it was sad that it ended, I'm massively appreciative at the same time, because there was just a huge lesson in there. I think that rigidity in our thinking and in the way that we approach things, our ability to be flexible in how we do things going forward and being open to things being different to how you thought they needed to be, I think could be a really powerful way to go.
Yeah, I think that ties into a concept of being judgmental. I think most of us would agree that, generally being judgmental is not a good thing, right? We're making judgments and passing, our thoughts on to how other people should act and behave. And that's something that, in my journey is just trying to be a better person. I've tried to work on that. And one tiny little shift in thinking of being judgmental versus just being curious can change everything. So when you look at somebody and they're doing something in a way that maybe doesn't make sense to you, and your initial reaction is to judge whatever they're doing, if you just for a moment step back and actually just be curious, be like, that's pretty interesting that they handled that situation that way. I wonder how they came to that thought process or why they did that. And it can really just humanize everything and just makes the world a lot more approachable too. So going through this time with just the lens of curiosity and not fear as much as you can, and not judging how, difficult it might be, I think that could be a helpful kind of perspective.
When it comes to judging, is there almost a justification that occurs of, because if I'm judging how somebody else is, it's almost me justifying to myself how I'm either right or that, because then I don't have to change, right? I don't have to do anything different. And if I all of a sudden, if they're approaching something differently, then it reflects back to me that I might have to do something different here, then yeah, there's a whole responsibility piece in there. And, now I've got to actually do something differently.
Yeah. I mean, it's always seemingly like a self-justification, right? We're judging someone, and it could be something stupid like sleeping in until noon on a Saturday. If I heard of someone maybe my age doing that, I might judge them as being like lazy or whatever that, I'm just making this up, but it's funny. But like, if you look at it just through curiosity and then start embracing that it's really a good thing that we're not all identical, right? That's again, going back to the evolutionary, not just psychology, but just how we evolved. If we were all the same, one infection would wipe us all out, So thank goodness that we have this, not only just like biodiversity and genetic diversity, but that we're just looking at the world differently. And it's what it makes this world so exciting. So yeah.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? It gets so boring otherwise if everything was the same and it was so predictable. Like, I think it'd be awesome. Maybe I think I could probably go for a few weeks. Or, maybe a few months or so, like, of just knowing exactly what's going to go down all around. And then it's kind of like, someone retires and goes and sits on a beach somewhere. And then, you almost get antsy a little bit after a period of time, because you want to find purpose and meaning in the things that you're continuing to do, right? Even if it's not work, finding ways to continue to reinvent and find new ways of doing things. I saw this video, I think it was about 3 or 4 months ago, and it was of this couple who had been married for a very long time, and it was the question of how do you go about conversing when the other person has done something that isn't necessarily how you would approach it, right? Let's put it nicely.
Yeah.
How would you go about that? And one of the things that they had shared, it was curiosity, and it was asking questions rather than pointing fingers. It was asking a question. Tell me more about how you're feeling right now. Tell me more about how you came to that. It's this curiosity. And I think questions is a really important part of curiosity. When I'm giving talks, I'll often talk about curious language and curious tonality, where curious language on its own can still be self-defeating, but it's the curious tonality that comes in there that all of a sudden gives life to it, because you can be saying like, oh, what are we going to do? Versus, what are we going to do? Right. And it's one takes you in the exact opposite direction. Have you ever seen the Bruce Lee interview? It's like a black and white interview. He talks about being like water, be like water, or be water, my friend.
I've heard of that. I don't think I've seen that particular piece.
You haven't seen it? It's something along the lines of, be water, my friend. Water is shapeless. It's formless. It becomes the cup, or something like that. I paraphrase it, but it is. It's thinking about it in that way of continuing to flow with that, of not needing it to be a certain way. And I definitely got trapped and stuck in that way of thinking for many years, of needing it to be painful, a certain way.
Yeah. I think we create our own suffering around that,
Do you struggle with that, of things needing to be a certain way still?
I think a knee-jerk reaction for me is still to have that. And then, but being hyper aware of it, it lasts a split second and I can move on kind of with grace and kind of use some of the tools that I've, built up over the years. But I think there's so much of us that is just ingrained and it just becomes so habitual. These thoughts like, I don't get to tell myself what I'm going to start thinking next. It just happens. Now, you think over time, if you start, using some protocols to maybe override some of that, you can retrain your brain. But like, for decades, you've kind of been making these split second judgments or kind of thoughts. And yeah, it's hard. But I think just recognizing them and then trying to transmute them is kind of something that I've been actively working on for a long time.
That awareness piece that you shared there, I think is really important to talk about, right? The way I tend to think about it is like having space around the thought, right? Where if you're able to see the thought for what it is, or the feeling, or how it is that you're experiencing it, and then being able to decide, okay, do I want to continue in that way, or am I going to do something differently? There's almost a space around it, and I think it was Novak Djokovic talks about, you're in the past, you're in the future. That's the mind as a traveler. It goes into the past, it goes into the future. It's not about always being present and always being able to be just here and centered. It happens. And I think the key words he used was, it's not a matter of whether you go there, you're going to go there. The question is, how quickly can you bring it back?
Mm-hmm.
And I think cool. It's a lifelong skill. Like he has to be on, like, by the time he gets to the back of the tennis court, right, and be ready to go again. Like he's become a master of that when it comes, and that is really a piece of his skill set around mental toughness, and it's built and developed over time. And yeah, I mean, how quickly can you bring it back?
And who's actually driving? Who's steering the ship? Once you become aware of your thoughts and you realize the thoughts are not necessarily you, those are just the thoughts that you are having. And you talk about space or just having perspective. You actually have agency over that. You can change your thoughts. You might not be able to immediately block a thought from coming in, but if you do have that awareness and you can immediately get back, and again, I use the word transmute. I like, because it feels like that's what I'm trying to do with like maybe an unsavory thought. I want to transmute that into something that is more, positive. And yeah, it sounds like Djokovic has a really cool technique for it as well.
Yeah, he's got it down, right? But it's there was an interview that I saw a while ago with him. The interviewer was really talking about how it's almost like, oh, you're born with it kind of mentality that he was trying to get across, and Djokovic stopped him in his tracks. And this is just working at it over and over and over again. And it's like a muscle of like building that up and building that ability. And eventually you get better and better and better, just like any skill. And it's such a incredible skill to develop, because I think this is really important to be talking about, because as the change continues to ramp up, and if by estimates the change is only going to get faster and faster and bigger, and a year's worth of change is going to happen in a matter of days, weeks, or months, that ability to be able to now, and building it now while this amount of change is going on, that ability to be able to, okay, whatever happens, I have a thought and I can then almost create space around it, transmute it, as you mentioned, to be able to do something different is so important, because there's so many more things are going to be coming to us every single second, or every single minute, or every single day, that our ability to be able to continue to adapt comes first in that ability to be able to be aware of what it is that we're aiming to adapt into in the first place, right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's going to only accelerate, I think. Yeah. And having that skill to navigate is going to be important.
Have you always had the ability? I mean, let's go back to some of these earlier days. I'd love to hear about the music side, and just let's talk about some of the amazing adventures that you're able to experience there. Because did you study first and then you went out into the world from a music standpoint? Like, fill me in.
Yeah. I grew up in San Diego, which was like a really great place to live. Not so different from many parts of Australia as well, because I got to go live out there in Melbourne. But yeah, just a great place to grow up. I was a soccer player in high school, and I went to a pretty decent but just average public high school. Had a good experience doing that and went to UCLA for school and studied psychology and then anthropology as well. So I came out of there with a degree, and I had started playing high school kind of late. I ended up tutoring one of my friends in high school, and his dad was a great musician, and he taught me how to play guitar for my payment. So and I was just wanted to play Tom Petty and Eric Clapton songs. I didn't have any ambitions of actually writing music or doing anything like that. So yeah, senior year of college, I had formed a band. This was in the late 90s, early 2000s. With the punk rock scene was pretty furious, and so I had formed a band, and managed to graduate and stuff. And I was graduated with honors, and I was very proud of that. But at one point I told my mom, while I was living in Australia, so I did a study abroad, just to kind of loop it back. So studied abroad, lived in Melbourne for a year, and during that I was also playing some music, and I called my mom. I was like, I'm not gonna finish my degree. And she's like, the hell you are. We put a lot of time and money into you.
Punk rocker you are.
It was full on. But I heeded her advice and the whipping she was going to give me, and I got my ass back to to LA after my study abroad and finished up. And I was really very, very glad I did. But I did kind of make a point of saying, look, this is my passion, at least for now. This is something that I want to pursue. I know it's got a very, very, very tiny chance of becoming like a long time career for myself, but it's like, as far as I know, we only get one chance, on this spinning ball. And I really, really wanted to make the most of it. And I put in a lot of time, to get to a good school like UCLA. I graduated with honors there. So I feel like I can do something that's for me, as long as it's not going to put, my life in jeopardy or at risk. So yeah, we formed a band, and we're playing out throughout LA, the Roxy and all the the famous bars, and the Vans Warped Tour was a big tour at the time, and they had a contest to go play a day at the Warped Tour, and there was hundreds if not thousands of bands that submitted their demo tapes, and we got picked. And so it was really fun to do that. And then we had brought a big crowd to that first show, and the founder of the tour, he knows everything that's going on this tour. There might be 50 bands playing in a day, but he knows. He's very observant. This guy named Kevin Lyman. He's great. And yeah, he invited us to tag along for a few more dates that year, and then invited us back, for the full tour a couple of years in a row after that.
Really cool, man. What were some of the biggest lessons that you learned during that time?
Yeah, I mean, band dynamics are always, really, really key. And I feel like sometimes, like, what makes or break a band, can they actually just get along and be on the road together and, not want to rip each other's, throats out. So I think just being gracious during those times, because it's not easy being on the road. But I really did treat, my band like my very first business. I took it really, really seriously. We didn't necessarily have like a P&L and a balance sheet, but we had performance reviews in a sense. And, if you didn't show up to rehearsal on time, like, you heard about it. And so I think just taking, what could seemingly be just like a hobby and a passion, but like really putting some structure around it to give yourselves like the best chance for success. So yeah, I just learned to go for it. I had no idea if we were going to get chosen out of thousands of bands. Like, who knows who listened to those and what the criteria was. But, the fact that we did that, and then showed up, we took as much of an advantage as we could from that. And little did we know, we impressed, the founder of the tour, who was just like, yeah, you guys did great. Come along for some more. So just putting it all out there was really something I've learned.
That's really cool. How is that shown up then in the businesses that you've built since? What are some of the things that you've found from that time? Again, you mentioned you're treating it like a business. Have there been some areas that you've now incorporated into that? Some lessons that you've learned along the way? Because there's some key lessons in there, right, around showing up and around really holding each other accountable as well.
Yeah, I think the first thing is be careful who you work with. Whether it's in a band or in a company, and yeah. At the end of the day, I mean, unless you're some solopreneur, like literally working by yourself, you're going to be dependent on others, even if they're not necessarily like your business partners or employees, but you're going to be dependent on it. So I think choosing wisely, of who you're going to surround yourself with, and these things don't happen overnight. And so it's a lot of time. And so I've been very careful. I've had several business partners over the years, and luckily I'm batting close to 1,000 with like just having really good ones that have supported and, complemented, my strengths and weaknesses and so forth.
How do you choose wisely then? What are the steps that you can take to make the best decision that you can with what you've got available to you?
I think a lot of it is you get back what you're putting out there, and that's not always the case. But if you are entering into a business relationship or some sort of an arrangement, and you're going into it with the best of intentions and your full authenticity, and are able to communicate, like, you'll probably sort past some of the lesser choices, and just kind of hopefully what rises to the top are those that kind of resonate with you, on a philosophical and integrity and kind of the more important aspects, I think, of a partnership. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the times it does come down to, your gut feeling. And, for me, whether it's in the music world or just business in general, like, I want it to be fun. Like, I don't, life is too short. Not every day has to be rainbows and bubblegum, but like, I want 80-90% of my days to be close to that, or else, like, why am I doing it? So I think just having a real friendship and, kind of a playfulness with those that are around you, at least that's kind of my personality. So I think that's something that I look for.
Yeah. It's almost like an undercurrent, like the underlying current or the baseline, it being, all right, we're really enjoying this, and there's some ups, there's some downs and everything in between. And at the end of the day, if you've got that baseline of, all right, we're actually enjoying this together, then, and that goes for friendships, it goes for relationship, it goes for business as well. You mentioned about performance reviews and things like that. How do you go about monitoring the progress of, and maybe this goes for within a business, but also within your own life now? Are there any things that you have in place to monitor progress?
Not really. I mean, I'll be perfectly honest. I am not the most like detailed metric focused person in the world. And I know that's probably a good opportunity, for me as I continue my business journey, and even just personally. Like, for me, it's always just, how's it feeling? That's kind of what I use as my gauge, or how am I feeling about that person's performance? And, do I feel like they're headed in the right direction? So it's a little bit more touchy feely than kind of hardcore metrics and things like that. I think it just suits kind of my personality, but not always great when you really do need to get drill down into the metrics though,
At the end of the day, there's no right or wrong about it. Really. Does it enable you to get the result that you want? And if it does, then rock on, do it however it is that you're doing it, right? And if it's not, then you go about changing that. That comes full circle about flexibility, as in there, and ensuring that the approach that you're taking is enabling you to get the results that you're going for. And I think we can go overkill at different times of measuring and tracking too much stuff as well. And
you can get overloaded.
I mean, that can do your head in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But just like a band needs to complement one another, right? I don't need 3 guitar players in my band, right? Or 4 drummers, right? That doesn't make any sense. So finding complementary people in your business world are really important. Have someone that is like really into analytics and really dialed in on the details is really important, because you can't have, 2 or 3 just visionary people that nothing's ever going to get done. So I think that's really important, is like choosing those that can really complement on areas that you might just have some blind spots and weaknesses.
Yeah, I think it's a really, really good one, because like I said, we're all different and we all have different strengths, different weaknesses. I'm definitely more of a bigger picture person. I've come to learn to love the detail, but it drains me of energy.
How'd you come to love it?
I love the outcome of it.
Okay.
And it enables me, if I have an outcome or a purpose or a reason why it makes sense to do it, then yeah, getting down into the weeds and getting those, from a tracking standpoint. And it comes down to, what areas am I aiming to get results in? I know for me and with my clients, we have like a performance tracking system which tracks, goals, objectives, but it can even go down into body measurements and other stuff like that, depending on how detailed somebody wants to go. And I don't know, I think that's probably the simplest way, is realizing and knowing the outcome that it generates. Because if it was just a detail on its own, then I'm not doing it. I think of it as this term of like connecting the detail to the dream, because if you can connect whatever the detailed stuff is to, and this goes just monotony of stuff that has to get done as well. And if you can chunk that up to, okay, for what purpose am I doing that, and why, and to a point where it becomes, and I do this little exercise within certain keynotes that I do of connecting the detail to the dream. And I'll ask a question and go, okay, what's something that you really hate doing, but you know it has to get done? And, usually it's like doing the dishes or, housework or this or that. And we have some fun with it. Okay. And go through this process of, okay, and why is it that you need to get that done? Well, it enables me to get the house clean. Why is the house being clean important? And we go onward and onward. Oh, well, it enables me to do other things outside of the home. Oh, what are some of those things you enjoy doing? And, I really enjoy going hiking in the mountains. Oh, great. What is it about being out there that's really good about being, that you enjoy? And we eventually get, because it's just me in solitude and I just feel this sense of peace. And I go, oh, damn. So we've gone from like doing the dishes or doing the washing right up to a sense of peace. And all of a sudden we've connected the detail to the dream. And that I've found to be something that, again, I've got to practice it over and over again because I'm not perfect at it. But when I do find myself lacking the motivation, I guess, that can help with something that I'm not really wanting to do. So yeah, that's one of the ways.
Yeah. I mean, I know the other saying, I'll probably butcher it, but if you don't measure it, you can't improve it, or some version of that. And so I understand, like, it is important to have metrics on all sorts of things, but it can spin out of control. Yes. Even just like on the personal side, right? If you wanted to measure, all the different things from the hours of sleep you're getting to the type of sleep to calories, protein. I mean, there's so many things going on with how much protein we're supposed to be eating. It's like you can get obsessed and off track real quickly. So
yeah, I do track. I track from an Oura Ring standpoint, track roughly caloric intake and expenditure, but don't like go down into the detail now. I did it for a period of time to get clear on, okay, this is around about the amount that I'm getting for this meal and this meal. But there was a post, I don't know, I can't remember who it was, but she had been tracking everything and then just went, you know what, I'm not going to track any of my sleep anymore. I'm just going to remove it. And for her, she got better night's sleep, a better quality of sleep. I think this is really good to be talking about because we are going to be presented with an infinite amount of choices as to how we track, how we build relationships, how we communicate with one another, how we go about building our businesses, how we go about living our lives. And the intentionality around that, I think, is really important to be thinking about how we're ensuring that we're going in the direction that we want to go in versus going in the direction that we think we need to go in, or going in the direction that a company thinks we need to go in and they're very good at marketing the product or service to move us in that direction. And, we only have to look at such addictive qualities of things like social media and other aspects where they're incredible tools. I mean, like, as people listen to this podcast, that is not possible if we don't have these certain technologies in place. And so they can be incredible tools and they can massively take you off track at the same time if you're not really intentional about it. So maybe that's a follow-up piece when it comes to being flexible, right? From adaptability standpoint, is there being some level of intentionality there, because otherwise, you're just going to get pulled in all these different directions.
Yeah, you'll be just adrift in the wind, based on the currents that are happening. So yeah, I mean, how do you become intentional though? You have to have some sort of North Star, I think, that you kind of feel, is right. But then, at least taking that step there. And if it's not right at the midpoint, it's okay to adapt and readjust. But at least, having some forward movement, I think, in those directions are really smart.
Yeah. The North Star thing, let's talk about that for a bit. Do you have clarity on what your North Star is? And then have you over the, I guess, over the period of time, whether it's personally, professionally, there's been some big changes in your life. Like, what have been some of those changes, and how has the North Star guided you, I guess, or at least been a beacon of light for you to be able to determine which way it is that you're going to go? How have you gone about making certain decisions?
That's a great and potentially heavy question. But yeah, I mean, my North Star, I think has shifted, as a young man, as I mentioned, the band days, my North Star was just like making the most out of this time on this planet. I was not married. I had no kids. I had a passion for, music and creation and just loved every aspect of it. So at that time, my North Star was like, go make this pretty big, low odds dream, try and make it come true, and at least enjoy it. And so I did that. Then I did get married and started having children. And that became, my North Star of that was like, take care of those kids, and then everything else really became secondary. Like I'm sure I'm not alone, certainly as a father, but I'm sure mothers as well. Like, you just want to provide. It's very much instinctual for most of us. And I was forming companies, not because I was passionate about either of them, but this was just a way for me to, put food on the table and have the flexibility to be around for my kids. And so that's really became, my North Star. And then I'll fast forward to where I am today. And, we just sent our youngest off to college, and now like the day-to-day, caregiving and requirements are vastly changed. And I'm really in this kind of transition time in my life where I'm 47 and, the kids are, pretty much out of the house. And it's like, so what do I want this next chapter to look like? And I know the general feeling or the general area I want to go in is being of service. And I know that may sound just like cheesy and cliche, but like, there's nothing better than like giving something to somebody and being of service to others. And I want to have an impact on what I do in my career, going forward. So I don't know exactly what that looks like by any stretch, but that's what I'm putting out there.
I don't think there's anything cheesy about it whatsoever. It's a beautiful way to focus on. And I think life becomes deeper, maybe is a good way of putting it, or more meaningful when it's in the service of others. And whatever that is, that can be building a company, it can be building a relationship, it can be philanthropic initiatives, it can be anything, right? And I've had this thing fairly recently of like, okay, how can I be as useful as possible? How can I actually, with the things that I've learned and how I've grown and the skill sets that have been developed, there's something beautiful about being useful versus it just being about doing stuff.
Absolutely.
It gives meaning, right?
I was just going to say that's giving meaning to your life, to have some sort of purpose and to know you're making an impact in somebody's life. That's a reason to wake up.
Do you think it's going to become more important as there's talks about AI taking a lot of jobs and the potential for there to be certain people that don't have a job, for example? There's talks of universal basic income, and is that a good thing or not a good thing when it comes to, okay, if there is mass displacement that occurs, what do you think about that then if that was occurring and yet we don't have ways of being useful? Like, what does that lead to?
Yeah, I don't know. I think some very, very smart, empathetic, emotionally intelligent people are going to have to come up with some of that, because I firmly believe we need to be doing active work daily. We have to have a purpose and be occupied. Most of us, again, I'm just going to speak in generalities. We need to be busy. We need to have stuff to do every single day, or I think mental breakdown and depression and anxiety, we're a species of hunters and gatherers, not to go back to the evolutionary stuff too much, but like, it's true. Like, the way our brains were formed, like, we were out there moving all day long, trying to get as much food as we possibly could get. And when everything's just kind of handed to you and you're just sitting there, I think that's going to be a huge, adaptation, or a place for, some new thoughts on how to occupy our time, if that really is what happens.
there was a moment during the pandemic where business was going really well for one aspect of my company, and there was a lot of time that I had that was just like, all right, what am I going to do with this time? Like, business was coming in, and then there was just all this time that it just felt like, man, I'm bored.
Yeah.
And it was just, all right, well, and I had to find a new sense of meaning. And my grandpa taught me about this through his actions. He started woodworking, when he was 80 years old. Like,
no way.
He just go, all right, gotta start making tables and stuff. It's
wow.
I mean, it's brilliant because it was just this beautiful lesson that I learned early on, that you're never too old to reinvent yourself. He was on the farm back in Australia, and so he was always using his hands and stuff like that. But as far as I know, he didn't build anything like that. But he ended up making tables and chairs and all this other kind of stuff. And it was never like intricate, amazing. There was a bit rough around the edges, if you will, but it was really good still. And he went right into his 90s doing that. And he was super proud of it. Every time we would go in there, I didn't appreciate it back then. But he had roses and woodwork. He had this mass amount of plants in the backyard, these rose bushes. Yeah, just grew these amazing roses. And then he'd have the woodwork that he'd do, and every single time he was really hard of hearing, and he'd say, "Come on down," and I would go down there, and I didn't appreciate it as much as what I realize now, that he was showing something that he was deeply passionate about. He'd found a new sense of meaning in something at that age, when most people are, hanging up the boots, if you will, and coming back to the always having something that just brings a sense of purpose to the stuff we're doing. I think is what you shared is it's going to be really important, and could be a dangerous place if we don't get it right.
It could be, yeah. But I think what your story of your grandfather points out, it can be as simple as gardening. I mean, I actually like to garden. I'm probably not as good as a grandpa, but like there is something super therapeutic and beautiful about cultivating something in your yard and just nurturing it and just making sure that it's okay. So it could be as simple as those types of things that maybe get us over the hump too. So it doesn't have to be digging wells, in Africa. It could be, I'm just tending to this garden and I'm taking care of the bees that come and pollinate my flowers. That feels great. So
I think it's a really good point, because for many of us, it's trying to figure out where to when things aren't how we want them to be can be downright confronting at times. And if we have to have it all figured out, it's like, oh, I've got to come up with this big thing that I'm going to do next. And if it can be as simple, like you said, as gardening, as you were sharing, I remember going to the Monet exhibit in Denver a few years ago, and it was fascinating because I was giving a talk there, and they had all closed off a private experience there. And so I got to walk around to all these different like crazy famous paintings and just be there. And I remember the security guard saying to me at a moment, she says, you're really lucky. And I said, oh, why is that? She says, during the day, there's like 30 to 50 people around every single one of these paintings. And it was just me and her. That was it, like, as I was walking around these paintings. But one of the biggest things that came from that wasn't from the paintings. Like, it was amazing to see them. But there was a quote of his on the wall. They created this whole exhibition. And it said, aside from painting and gardening, I'm good for nothing. And I just think that's brilliant. That is just brilliant. Knowing this is who I am.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to do those things and find beauty in those things. Yeah.
That's a great point.
Even the most incredible people have simple things as well, right? And I think finding joy in those simple things is great to be able to continue to pursue. When it comes to the aspects of life, and I know you mentioned about one of your kids going away to college now, and coming back to when they were young, and you mentioned about providing, did it shift automatically for you? Like, was it as soon as the kids were born, or your first child was born, that all of a sudden it went from, okay, my North Star is this, I'm going to go and have a great time and just see what's possible and all of that, to then all of a sudden immediately it had changed? Or did it change as you were in the relationship? And did it take a period of time, or was it instant for you?
For me, it was instant. Shit got real, living in Southern California. We were fairly young. I think I was 27, having my first kid. And yeah, it was like a light switch. I've been a responsible person my whole life, fairly. I've taken my risks. I've had my fun. But like, I knew like this was my responsibility, and it was something that, we wanted and actively brought into this world. This was something we planned on. And just so, yeah, I took it like, all right, this is my focus. This is my job now. And so, yeah, hung up the guitar, professionally, and, kind of got into the real business world, shortly thereafter. So,
do you still play?
I have an acoustic that I'll bring out. For now, it's usually just writing. I'll call them like Adam Sandler type songs, where I usually write a song
Yes.
for like Thanksgiving. I write one for a Passover that we have here. So, and I've written songs, just really stupid ones about my kids and our animals. So that's the extent. But I still bring it out and play it every once in a while, and it's still part of me.
That's awesome, man. What have been some of the big lessons then that you've learned from your relationship and going through with kids? Just how has that been?
Yeah. So, don't mind getting personal here, because this is what it's about, sharing, kind of my story, with you and your audience. But, when I did first get married, I mentioned I was pretty young, I was married at 25. And at that time, I hadn't had a lot of experience in like any kind of long-term relationships. I dated a little bit here and there. But when I met my wife, who's now my ex-wife, I'll get to that in a moment. It was a new experience for me, kind of just like a committed, relationship. And I'd be lying if I said there weren't just like some warning signs, of, at the time, my girlfriend, and there were some mental health warnings that I maybe should have heeded. But I'm very much like a fixer, if you will. And I'm very, empathetic, and I cared deeply and certainly loved this person. But there was enough warning signs that, I'm looking back now, like, man, that was maybe not, the smartest decision for a 20-year-old to make and jump in and then start having kids. So I did enter, that relationship, like, with a little thing in the back of my head, but was fully committed. I want to be very clear about that. And I love this person incredibly much, and she was wonderful and still is wonderful. And then we, started having children. And then for me, that's kind of where my focus really kind of went to. Not necessarily, didn't focus on my marriage, because that was always very, very important. But yeah, kind of was concentrating, primarily on career and the kids. And then, after about 10 years, I was just kind of going through some stuff. I was feeling like I was just like a passenger of this life. I was just like, this is not quite going how I had anticipated it. My career was fine. I wasn't unhappy necessarily, but I wasn't like stoked on where I was at there. And then I was looking at this relationship with my wife, and it just didn't feel right anymore, and it hadn't for a long time. And I was given I wasn't given, but I was told by a friend to read this book called The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And I mentioned it before to you, I believe. And it just so happened, I love the way the universe works. So in one of my jobs, I was in grad school, I was working at this place that replicated CDs and DVDs when those were a thing. Hopefully most of your audience knows what those are. And so one of the customers that we had was a book publisher called New World Library, and they actually made Eckhart Tolle's books onto CD. So anyways, long story short, I was able to take samples from my work. And so I had this 7 CD set of The Power of Now that I had gotten years and years ago, and was in a junk drawer somewhere. And when this friend of mine said, "Hey, I think you might really enjoy The Power of Now," I'm like, you know what? That sounds kind of familiar. Rummaged through the drawer and found this 7-disc set and popped it in. And it really, I would say it changed my life, just the perspective of it. You mentioned about Djokovic being in the past and in the future, but what the whole essence of the power of now, as the name might denote, is like we're living our life right now. Everything that actually is happening to us is in these moments, right here and now. And I really just kind of had, I don't know if I want to say an awakening, or I had just a transformation, and I selfishly, I want to be really clear, and that's something that I would instill upon my children too. Like, it's okay to be selfish in this life. Like, I didn't necessarily ask to be born. I'm very grateful that I am. But I still want it to live like my most fulfilling life. And obviously this doesn't mean you get to go neglect your kids and go run off to maybe Australia, and do that. So you have responsibilities, and that's not what I was talking about. But I wanted a more fulfilling life. And, I basically just hit the reset button. I was about 37 years old, something like that. And decided to end the marriage that I was in, decided to end the partnership of my company that I was in, and just kind of wanted to blank slate it, and it was certainly one of the most difficult, trying times that I ever went through. And for a short period of time, a year and maybe 2 years, had full custody of my kids, which at the time I hadn't cooked a meal in 10 years or done laundry. So I was really just like thrown into the deep end of what I know a lot of people do on a daily basis. But, obviously I wouldn't change anything. And shortly thereafter, I ended up meeting, and I had known this other person for some time. She was just a friend. And then she had ended her relationship. I had ended mine. And yeah, we just kind of looked at each other and were like, you're everything that I was ever looking for, and kind of certainly mutual. Wow. And we didn't even end up dating because we already had like a friendship. We were just like in it. And so, yeah, we literally just celebrated our 10-year wedding anniversary just 2 days ago. So,
wow, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. But it wasn't easy, Cameron. Yeah.
Yeah. What wasn't easy about it?
Well, one of my deepest fears is like not being liked or hurting people. And I definitely did that, when I was ending my marriage. I was very close with her family, and, still somewhat close with them. But yeah, I think for a lot of them, it was a shock, but it was something that had been building in me for years, because they didn't quite know what I had gone through early on. And, some of the things that I felt like I had been kind of manipulated on. And so definitely did not want to hurt anybody, but I knew, like, to be selfishly and live like my true life, or my fullest potential, and not feel like I'm going to have any regrets. I needed to do that. And then I feel like the universe answered.
Yeah. I mean, it happened beautifully and fairly quickly by the sounds of it, man, which is amazing in itself. And, was that fear, like the need to be liked, the fear of not being liked, that piece, was that one of the major factors or a contributing factor to it going on for as long as it did, and you not ending 100%. It? Like what was it? Was it the main factor?
I think so. And I also just think being just kind of naive and somewhat immature at 25. I mean, just not really knowing enough at that time of what like a healthy relationship should look like. But yeah, being scared, really just honestly, I was just scared to hurt somebody, even though like I knew, and then there was enough great things. That's the thing. Like I think a lot of us are so good at kind of settling and, just making the best, settling was the wrong word. We're good at making the best of a situation. I know that's certainly key for me. And so I was not miserable. From the outside, I think a lot of people thought I was very happy. And I think for the most part I was, because I was able to adapt and make the most of situations. And this person was wonderful on so many levels. So like I had a great life, but it didn't quite, fill my cup up, and I didn't, and I had some resentment that had built up over the years. So yeah, that fear of not being liked and hurting people was just key.
Yeah. What didn't fill you up? Because I think this is really important, because the amount of work that I've done now over the past 15 years with clients, where And whether it's within a relationship or the business that they're running, the career they're in, or otherwise, often there are enough good things for it to be good enough.
Yeah.
And if you're not really conscious about it and really intentional about it, really getting clear on, okay, what are the aspects that lead to me being my best self or living my best life, and having those pieces in place, fulfilling on full potential, like 10 years, 20 years, 30 years can go past actually pretty quickly.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's so many other areas, so many other distractions, whether it's kids or business or otherwise, that can almost cover it up or blindside it a little bit. What deep down did you know was missing? And how did you eventually become really clear about that? Because the book was one thing, like, yeah, just maybe let's cover that for a bit.
I think one thing was missing and one thing was present that I couldn't avoid. I'll start with the thing that was present. There was resentment. I had started building up a tremendous amount of resentment.
Where did that come from?
It felt to me, right? I can't say it was from her perspective, but I felt like I was the center of her universe. Like coming into the relationship, I brought all the friends. I brought all the, the social things. I even came in with the band. Like I just had like kind of my life, and then we came together, and then I felt like I was the source of her everything. And it felt like a lot of pressure to do that, to be someone's everything. And then I mentioned there was, some mental health situations and issues, and there had been some suicide attempts, where I didn't know what to do except just try to put out that fire and kind of carry on. So that never ever left me. I buried it deep, but I resented, as I got older and kind of had more perspective, that it felt like a manipulation. Okay. Whether it was real or not, conscious or subconscious. Like I was a 25-year-old young man that was at that time, Cameron, trying to end a relationship, and then had things like that happen, that it just locked me in. I didn't know what to do. And so that resentment was always there. And then a very close aspect of that is what I did not have. So here's the thing that I didn't respect her. And I talked to a lot of young adults, actually. I've had the pleasure of, speaking to some entrepreneurial groups and MBAs at Irvine, UC Irvine. And I talk a lot about just that word respect, and that goes for a romantic or professional. Like if you do not have a mutual respect in a relationship, I would argue that it is doomed. And it's going to be, it might take 10 years, or some people might just bear with it, but it won't be a fulfilling relationship. And so that was what was really missing. The respect had really withered away, and the resentment amped up, and that was a bad recipe.
I mean, they're two big ones, and that must have been, I can only imagine how challenging that was to go through when there is the deep-rooted piece for you of this need to be liked and a fear of hurting other people. And if that's there, and then there's a pattern on the other side of that, which is, it's almost like it's a perfect pattern that was there, right? Where, okay, if someone is willing to not hold firm boundaries and stand up for themselves in different ways and go and choose what it is that is right and aligned for them, then someone who can consciously or unconsciously can manipulate that and utilize that. And often these patterns are not, again, they're not conscious, but they're there. Like that's the reality of it, that there are different patterns that we have. And we all have these in different ways, shapes and forms, right? We all have different fears come up. We all have different patterns of behavior, and our ability to be able to, again, coming back to that level of awareness that you built out to a point where it wasn't that the resentment wasn't there. It became that you became aware of that resentment and being willing to build the ability to hold true and hold firm to who it is that you are and what it is that you know that you deserve. It's a huge amount of growth that you went through during that time. And I can only imagine how that must have been when you had young kids at the same time. So hats off to you for being able to move through that and come out the other side in a way that enabled you to finally find what it is that you were looking for in that specific area of your life?
No, I mean, if you look for validation, or if I try to, I'm like, I made the right decision. I mean, just, not only how my kids have turned out and like, what do you want to model for them? But like, yeah, then the universe gave me the most magnificent person that, I could have even imagined to be my life partner and my wife, and how we, brought our families together, and where we're, again, celebrating 10 years of being together. So it's validating, to have it all be worthwhile, but it wasn't easy by any means. And, I really had to come down to the point where like I wasn't going to settle anymore. That's a word that I kind of kept going round and round in my mind, is like, don't settle. You've done enough, and you've been the nice guy forever, but you have your life, and I always think about, now that I have kind of older kids, like, what would I want for them? Would I want them to be in a relationship that just like was kind of half-assed, or, just like maybe just ran its course, right? I mean, I think we can be okay with that too, right? And having relationships serve their purpose, and then maybe end, or maybe transform, right? And some people separate and become really good friends afterwards, like that wasn't necessarily our situation, but I've heard that, right? I don't know, decoupling or some weird word like that. But yeah,
Yeah.
like my mom, right, who's like my biggest fan of all time, like she would not want me, to be in a relationship that wasn't 100% fulfilling and everything that she would want for her son. And I would say the same thing for my kids. So, not settling was really just that mantra. And, I selfishly, again, I'm not afraid to admit, like, and I think it's okay to be selfish. I do, as long as you're not having like major collateral damage that you could avoid, right? I think take care of your responsibilities, but like, you have your life to live.
And I mean, you're modeling as well. Like the not settling part is you're modeling a great life. You're modeling to value yourself. You're modeling what it means to value yourself, and you're modeling that to your kids rather than just talking about it. Because I'm a massive believer in being a living, breathing example. Because if you're able to show it rather than talk about it, it's worlds apart. Worlds apart. A really good friend of mine, saw her in New York a few years ago. She'd just finished up at an event, and we met in the lobby. It was like 11:30 at night, because we hadn't met in person before. Great friend of mine. And we're both talking around the relationship side of things. And she said the words, "Don't settle." And this is me at the time, probably 7, 8 years single, and, hadn't found the woman that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with, but being very clear on what it is that I wanted to experience. And those words really stuck with me. And to be in a stunningly beautiful marriage now with an incredible woman, and to have everything that I could have ever dreamed of is that don't settle is something not to be taken lightly. It's something to be really thought about. If you listening right now don't take anything else away from today, is to maybe ask yourself the question, like, where am I settling? Like, what areas of my life am I actually settling right now? Because I think probably at different times we're all settling in some way, shape, or form. Like, I know there's areas of my life where I go, you know what? Yeah, I could probably step up a little bit there, right?
Sure.
And because it's always another level. There's always another level to grow and evolve into. And if there are certain areas that are clearly out of alignment, then like, what specifically are you going to do differently going forward to make those changes? Whether it's to repair a relationship, or to move away from one, or within business, or wherever it is, right? I think it's so important, because we only, like you said at the start of early on, that as far as we know, it's the only life we get, right? And making the absolute most of it with the people that light us up it's an incredible thing to experience. Respect and resentment. How has it been different in your 10-year marriage?
Yeah. Starting with the respect. I mean, my wife's a badass, and I married someone that is driven, that is not just in work though. You know, like people think driven is, you know, typically around work, but she's driven to be like a great mom and we don't use the word stepmom, but of course the stepmoms, my kids are grown now, but like she's just driven to do life, you know. It's fun to get to experience that. Again, the previous version of my relationship was like I was kind of the center. I was like the one that was doing everything, kind of bringing her along, you know, and which was fine. Like getting to show people things and experiencing that's wonderful too. She just has a zest for life. She owns her own company and she has her own life too. I'm not the sole source of her life. So, I just respect her integrity, her loyalty. And so it's off the charts of just like the respect, and it's mutual, you know, for whatever reason, she thinks I'm the greatest. So she respects what I've done as a dad, as a businessman, as a friend, as a son. Like she just, you know, she respects the hell out of me. And it's like just the foundation. We really enjoy obviously each other, and, you know, we're excited for our next decade together.
What I hear there is an incredible alignment of values.
Yep.
Which I think is really important.
Yeah. She's spiritual the way I am. She's a nature lover the way I am. You know, it's just some of these, you know, kind of core pillars, but we're not identical. You know, we won't take each other to a concert of our choosing. You know, I mean, we have, of course, but we joke like it doesn't work. You know, she'll go see Marilyn Manson, and she has a very eclectic. I mean, she likes everything, but, you know, yeah, no more, you know, Marilyn Manson shows for me. Just not my cup of tea. And, you know, I'll take her to some of my stuff. She does better at mine than I do at hers. So, yeah. But it's great. Like we're not carbon copies of each other by any means. Like we're actually pretty different in you know, kind of like the things that we like sometimes, but like, yeah, the core and then that respect foundation is paramount. It's very much our friendship, you know, like we laugh a lot. So it's good.
I've heard that so many times from people that have really good relationships. And I actually, I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago, I had conversations with a number of people that were in not only long lasting relationships or marriages, actually all of them were marriages in this case, but long lasting, loving marriages. Because there's a massive difference.
Yes.
And I just sat down with each of them and said, what does it take? And I just listened and took notes, and I have pages and pages of notes from these people that have had beautiful, loving relationships from people that I respect, because I wanted to know, you know, obviously I had not been successful at that point in time in my life of attracting the right person into my life and then maintaining that relationship and turning it into something incredible. And being friends was a massive one. And what you just shared then of, the commonalities that are there, every time it was, we are our own person as well. And there being a respect with that of, oh, you enjoy that? Love it. That's great. Ensuring that person makes time and finds time for that. And when your needs become their needs in a way, that's a beautiful experience to have.
It really is. Yeah.
What about resentment?
Yeah, it doesn't really rear its head in this relationship. I mean, the closest that it could become, which is the flip side of her having her own life, is like sometimes I miss her, right? She recently became a rabid Dodger fan a couple years ago. So 2 World Series under her belt now. But, you know, this is something that, you know,
jumped on the wagon.
I know. And you could say that, and that wouldn't be inaccurate, but the way it came about is her best friend had been a season ticket holder, or her family had, for 60 years. And so her best friend has gone, you know, for the past 20 years or whatever. Anyways, just recently, 2 years ago, just, you know, on a whim, just started inviting my wife to go to a game or two. And just fell in love with the game. And obviously they won, you know, the World Series last year and went to spring training and all that, both last year and this year. And so, so she became, you know, a very, very, you know, rabid fan and, you know, goes to a lot of games. So if anything, you know, her having her own life, you know, the resentment is that was a lot of baseball in October that you got to go to. You know, she went to 3 of the World Series games, and so I was at home. So I'm not going to call it resentment, but I'm going to say it was a little like, feeling a little not that important right here, a little left out maybe. But I honestly like that. The flip side is it was so cool to get to see her get to do that. You know, like who gets to do that kind of stuff. So it's like I get to live very much vicariously, and really stoked for her.
Yeah, that's amazing. Do you talk about your relationship? Do you about what's working, what's not, these different questions to ensure that anything that might be bubbling underneath the surface kind of gets addressed? And how do you go about communicating?
We're kind of both, the one area that we are very, very similar is like we analyze everything to death. And we're both like, I think, very good communicators. So yeah, that's been a really, I think, great part of our relationship. I mean, sometimes the overanalyzing can get a little exhausting, but no, if there's even the hint, and we're so connected too, like we can just feel each other. Like, I'm sure you and your wife, like you just know when something's off, and it could just be like, normally you would have grabbed my hand in that situation and you didn't, so you pick up on all these subtleties. And so, yeah, we'll nip it right in the bud. We really just talk it out, and make sure we get through it. And something I was actually going to mention earlier, was a good time to talk about, is like when you are having any kind of a conflict, or someone maybe is not handling something the way you would think they would, the thing that we fairly recently discovered is just to argue the other person's side. And it's really just make sure that they're really heard. And it is transformative. You hear like the fight naked. That's fun too. We've done that. But actually just going and arguing for them, whatever it is that their point is. And if you can say, I mean, it just really just transforms, like,
all right, this I've never heard of this. So how does that happen? Like, talk us through an actual scenario. It doesn't have to be an actual scenario, but it can like an actual real world example.
Sure. I'll just stick with the baseball one, and I'm going to maybe make it a little bit exaggerated just for the point of this sake. But so let's say, maybe I give her a hard time for going to the 3rd World Series game, because like I'm home alone, right? I'm bummed. I don't get to go. And so we come home and I give her some attitude, like, well, I hope the game was fun. And, she sees that I'm a little pissed about it. So what does that look like, right? So I'm feeling resentment, right? And she's feeling some version of like, this is a really great experience that I get to do, maybe once or twice, in a lifetime, although the Dodgers have been doing real well. So the real life experience would be her going and saying, I totally understand how like being at home, just kind of maybe having to cook your own dinner for the first night, and it might feel a little isolating. You're totally missing out on these amazing experiences while I'm out there, getting to do all this stuff. So that's her arguing me. And for me, it's like I get to go in and say, yeah, your best friend, who's graciously allowed you to come along with this journey, to experience these once in a lifetime, games, and it's only 3 hours. It's not that big of a deal, except for that one that was 18 innings. That one was a while. But yeah, it's really just like going in and like giving it from their perspective. So
how does it then? Because I think this is a tool that I'm going to test out with Brittany, and I think so many people listening to this will be able to utilize as well in their relationship. How does it come to a head? Because okay, you're talking, you're going into bat for the other person, and at what point does it then turn into something else? Is there a natural turning point that occurs that you find, or what happens?
It does. I think like it's almost, it feels very much like a light switch, because like the moment, this is all about empathy, right? Putting yourself in someone's shoes and feeling what they're feeling. The moment you do that and you're like, you kind of feel silly, like I'm a 47-year-old grown ass man. I have a nice home and I can watch a game on TV, and I can cook my own dinner. Like, isn't that a little beta or whatever? It's a little low to like, even have a mild amount of resentment. So I actually will feel silly, because I like just argued her side. It's like, oh yeah. Like, so I think in that, and it's mutual, and like, and she might've been defensive a little bit, right? About me giving her a hard time, but then she'll be like, I totally see how that kind of sucks. I'm doing all these really cool things. So let's make sure you and I go do something cool, next weekend, and she'll also say like, thank you for like not being a jerk about it and letting me go do this and have fun, you know?
I love that final step because there's one, a coming together. There's seeing the other person's point of view, which is such an incredibly important part. Otherwise, you are, again, we spoke earlier about judging, right? If I'm judging what somebody else is doing because I think it needs to be this way, then I'm not taking it into account the other person's needs or wants or desires. And in this way, it's enabling you to see each other for who you are, enabling to understand what's important to you. And the other really important thing is coming to some kind of resolution where you mentioned about, well, how I know that I've been away for this period of time. How about we go and do something together, this weekend, for example, or whatever it is. It's like there is a resolution that occurs and some form of responsibility that gets taken almost, right? Where you're both, because in this moment, you're both taking responsibility for then how you're feeling, for the other person's needs, and then coming to some kind of action, right? Does an action always happen, or is sometimes just acknowledging the other person enough?
I think there doesn't always have to be an action, because a lot of times it's just like a perspective, right? Like, I don't need to feel that anymore because I now have a bigger perspective or a different perspective. And so, yeah, for some things there could be a nice actionable, like, cool, yeah, we'll go do something that will help ameliorate some of that. But a lot of times it's a shifting of a perspective, because you were so sure that you were right and that you were justified and how you were feeling. And of course you are from your perspective. But then if you really do care and respect that this other person has their own life and ways of dealing with it, and you just jump in their shoes and be like, well, you have every bit of right to have that as well. And so it can just, for me, it really can just melt away, like, completely. Not to say it's going to go away forever, because we're human, but like some of that repetition makes it, those, coming together that much easier.
I love it. I love it. This, let's maybe broaden this out a little bit here and talk about maybe distilling down adaptability, because we've just, in a way, this has simply been adaptability. The last bit of the conversation here has been adapting in the relationship, right? And whether it's in your romantic relationship, whether it's in business, whether it's at, from a work environment or with friendships, or just simply within your own life, with technology, whatever it is. What would you say? So, okay, we started off with that flexibility piece. If you had to distill it down into maybe 3, 4, 5 steps, something like that somebody could take. Somebody's going through change right now. Somebody's in it. They're experiencing a challenging situation. How do they go about adapting? Like, what are some of the broad key steps that are required in order to make the change?
Getting clarity, right? I mean, I think a lot of times we can misinterpret, maybe what we're feeling, so I would say, like, whether it's professionally, getting someone to help you, like, see it, like whether it's, a coach or, a therapist or something, but like to really get clarity on the problem or the situation, to make sure that you actually are going to be able to point yourself in the right direction coming out of that. So clarity, and sometimes, most of us could probably do that on our own with just some just really good thinking, and, whether it's journaling and just really trying to be introspective. Then I think, obviously, like, if you have a partner or something, to kind of just share that. And most people won't know you any better than, that partner of yours, to kind of like to share that experience of how you're feeling, I think would be like another great kind of secondary step to kind of get validation on, what you think you have clarity on.
That's good. That second step just there, let's pause for a moment. So, because if we take it out broader, yes, it could be within your romantic relationship, but this could be a business partner. This could be a friendship. This could be with a therapist, like some kind of sharing how it is that you're feeling, what it is that you're going through, getting you've got some clarity of your own, but then getting some form of validation as well as to what it is that you're going through, right?
That's exactly right. And hopefully it's someone that would, that would tell you straight too, not just like someone that's readily going to agree with everything you say, not just someone to validate you, but just to really give you perspective.
Like ChatGPT does at different times. If you put in the question and you say, tell me the answer to this, and, it'll find that answer. And then you say, all right, you word it a little bit differently, and then you're going to get a completely different answer, right? So having those people in your life, I think, is really, really important. What else?
I think the next comes back to kind of a North Star type of a thinking. Like, all right, well, now that I've gotten some clarity and maybe some secondary validation on, this situation, like where do I want to go with this? So I think kind of looking kind of ahead, not too far, but like enough to say like, all right, that's actually where I want to start heading. And then like the next step after that would be like, what's one step I can take tomorrow, to get there.
Yeah, I love that. Where does flexibility come in with that then? Adaptability, is that then coming after that? So we've got these key pieces, and then as you're then taking the steps, then being able to be flexible in your approach there.
Totally. I mean, that North Star is just in one direction, and then you could go way off to the right and hook back left. You could do the same on the left side. You could do some loop-de-loos along the way. But I do believe, the way I look at the way the universe kind of operates is like, having that intention, right? And putting that out there. You might not know exactly which way it's going to move to get you there, but like, if that is where you want to go, I'm hard pressed to say you're not going to get there if that's what you really intend upon. And you take some action, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. Dude, it's been a great conversation. Let's jump into the rapid fire segment, Your Edge, made up of these three key components: your values, your beliefs, your habits. First question, first and foremost, is what's your number one value and why?
I was gonna say, and I'm not gonna dwell on it, but I was gonna say integrity was my number one value. It's something that I hear a lot out there, and actually I'll give my wife credit for saying that's her favorite trait of mine. That's what she says. Says your integrity. And I like that, but I'm not going to use that as my answer, even though I kind of snuck it in. My actual value is kindness. And the reason I'm choosing kindness is because unlike integrity, that's very like on me, right? It affects me. I mean, of course, someone that does not have integrity will have, busted relationships and all sorts of issues around that. But what kindness, right? Kindness is outward, showing kindness, but it also, can be kind to yourself. I just think we can say this now more than ever, that just showing kindness and compassion to each other, it's just needed. And it's hard enough out there that showing each other that level, and it kind of loops back to all these things we talked about. Curiosity, you be kind. Kindness and how you find disagreements or get through disagreements, and just, going back to non-judgment. If you're kind, you're not going to be judging somebody, just showing people that level of care, that we're all here on this planet. I think that's just I don't think it's undervalued, but it's something I definitely wanted to put out there, just being kind.
I think we could all utilize a little bit more of that in our lives and with other people and for other people. Yeah, I really love that one. What about on the belief side? What's a core belief that's really shaped who you become, whether it's about yourself, about the world, about others? What's a core belief?
I'm not sure if it's too reminiscent of some stuff I already spoke about, but my belief is that everybody is actually doing their best. And what I mean by that is even the drug dealer or the person that cheated you or that stole your car radio, I know those aren't great behaviors, but I've been carrying this around of like, I think everyone's doing their best with the asterisks, like given their circumstances and their tools and just where they are in life. And it doesn't justify, like, again, crappy behavior or illegal stuff. Like that's not what I'm saying. But like, I think if you can look at all of us, as in all of your interactions, and just know that person, or believe that they're doing their best, and they might be very off course of what their potential is, but right in that moment, they're doing the best they can to survive. And if we can kind of take that and maybe steer that into a way to uplift it and maybe get it to a more socially acceptable area, if it's something that's not, then I think that's, we'll be better off. But I kind of go through my life thinking that.
It's a great approach to take to life because it's almost a lightness that comes with that. It can be really heavy because you're carrying around so much. If somebody's doing this for this reason or somebody's doing that for that reason, if you just go into it, and I had tacos with a friend Brittany's friend and her husband a little while ago. We're getting tacos here in Austin. And one of the things that he said was that of assuming positive intent. And I love that. Assume positive intent. That, if someone cuts you off in traffic, assume positive intent. Maybe they had somewhere they had to get to. If something else bad happened, assume positive intent. And again, it doesn't justify bad behavior as such. There's boundaries that need to be set, these different pieces. But if you start with that, then there can be a meeting somebody where they are. And as you mentioned towards the end of what you were sharing there, which I think is great, of like there can be maybe a guiding them towards a better path if it's a behavior that's not warranted or not what you're wanting to experience or not what's appropriate within a workplace or whatever it is, right? So that assume positive intent, I think, is it's just something that really stuck with me. And I love that people are doing the best.
Leading by that example that you're saying. Yeah. I mean, I don't know who came up with the quote, and this is not the exact interpretation of it, but it's something along the lines of like, I'm going to treat you like a gentleman, and not because you are, but because I am. And just by kind of reframing, like not sinking down to someone's level too, right? It's kind of hard for them to
really
stay
cool.
there.
I haven't heard that.
Yeah.
There's a responsibility that gets taken there and there's character in there, right? Of I'm going to continue to be this version of myself, regardless of what happens or regardless of what I'm exposed to, what occurs. I'm going to continue showing up in the way that's true to myself because of who I am rather than what's going on around me. And really good. What about a habit, a ritual or routine that, you just can't live without?
Yeah. Mine's a trifecta. Well, I can't say I do all of them all the time, but I like to surf and I like to journal and I like to meditate, and they're all part of my almost daily routine. The waves aren't always working, and this year I did decide to switch up some of my fitness routine, so I wasn't just a one trick pony. But starting a day off in the ocean, it's exhilarating. It's very social. I got some really great friends that I get to surf with. There's dolphins out there. It's sometimes terrifying, which is good. So yeah, that's one part, and then I've been journaling and meditating for, I don't know, maybe 6-7 years, pretty consistently. And I find both of those to be just really great to start my day, clear out my head, work through some stuff, and just kind of be the best version, of myself.
Really good practices. Love it. Hey, great conversation. Where can people go to find out more about you? What are some of the things you're working on right now, and where can people find out more?
I'm a partner in a software design and development agency that's been heavily focused on AI and implementation around that, and that's called Spark 6. So they can go ahead and go to spark6.com and get a hold of me that way. Certainly available on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out. I love connecting and chatting with people. So yeah.
Great. Well, dude, thanks for being on the show. It's again, love the conversation. It's always good catching up with you and just being able to go deeper down here today has been great.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being on the show, man. Again, for those of you who are listening in right now, we'll link to everything that was mentioned in the show notes, how you can connect with Eric at the CameronAtlas.com/podcast. We have some great new guests coming up, so make sure you hit that follow button, leave a comment, and until next time, go write the next line in your story. It could be a giant leap, but it could also be a moment of clarity, a bold decision, or a daily act of discipline that takes you beyond what's comfortable. That's how we unlock your edge. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time here on The Edge of Possible.